of my best friends for sharing their stories publicly here this week, so figured I'd kick off my 2025 off by sharing my ICC departure story in bullet points. It's extremely long, but I wanted to break this down in bullet points for ease of reading. There are time skips and many things do happen in between, but if there weren't, might as well write you guys a novel instead. I hope this reaches someone and helps them see they're not alone in their experience. I was in the ICC for about 11 years, but things started to take a turn for me in 2018, when I moved to Sydney to train and be part of the mission team in New Zealand. To be frank, I did not have a good experience with Joe Willis, the world sector leader of Austral China. From our very first sit-down conversation, he brought up my weight. This made me feel insecure for a long time, and although I would lose a lot of weight that year, I couldn't retain it as I don't think I lost weight with a healthy mindset, rather to people please. He created a half marathon to use for collecting special missions and some people volunteered, but of course, he put me on due to my weight, no choice for me. We also had to raise money, so we had to call people. One day, he had us runners in his house calling for donations and would not let us leave until we individually raised to a certain amount that got us closer to our overall goals. I forget how much. We all ended up reaching that amount eventually after a few hours. He would also have the whole church fast until we each had a certain number of visitors confirmed for special services. He would laugh at how quickly people would hit their targets from this. While training, Joe told me to pursue a sister who liked me, and so I did, another reason to lose weight. This sister and I talked daily for 3 months, then another brother flew in who Joe really favored. About a month after that brother arrived, he unexpectedly asked the sister I pursued to be his GF at a midweek and she said yes, found out that Joe planned with this brother on how he'd ask the sister. He didn't tell me anything about it nor did he acknowledge that he did anything wrong, rather he blamed me for being jealous. The next week that brother also ended up being my roommate, region leader, and new discipler. Joe months later would bring this up and say, "You could have dated, sister, and led your region together, but God determined that, brother, was the right person instead." This statement confused me for a long time while in the church. Fast forward to 2019 and I'm in New Zealand with the mission team. First 3 months the guys and myself are put into an Airbnb from money raised from special, allegedly, then changes happen and a brother and I are now in a household together. This brother would be called to Samoa and I'm left with no one to replace him as it was a mission team. I end up paying the full cost of rent for a couple months, but those were the hardest months of my life as I only lived on $30 a week. No one helped financially, but a brother was kind enough to buy me a box heater to keep me warm during the cold winter nights. Sean, NZ church leader, was kind enough to let me stay with him and his wife till I found a spot. I end up moving into my own studio apartment, relieved of the financial burden. Soon after, Sean asks me to double my weekly contribution from $100 to $200 and to pray about it. Knowing I had no choice, I just gave. That Sunday, Sean thanks the church for their generosity and says, "I felt like I didn't have to ask any of you guys, you just gave." I stayed silent. I was angry as I felt he was being deceitful, but I stayed silent. 2021 I'm dating for the first time in the church and I'm excited. But as time went on, the excitement dimmed as the constant questions asking me when I'll propose started just 3 months after dating. Then about a year later in 2022, someone went as far as to say, not to sound morbid, but it would be good for you to get married so that your mom has a memory to take with her when she passes. That point on, I quietly pulled back in the relationship until my GF broke up with me. Around late 2021 I noticed a trend where people were doing Bible studies and they were being gaslit for questioning things. I once heard valid arguments and questions about the doctrine from a person studying and I could sense he genuinely was trying to understand the doctrine, but Sean and the intern he studied with both started gaslighting by responding with, "You're just not humble," or "You just don't love the truth." This didn't seem right to me as they were just attacking the guy personally. I remember being bothered by this and not wanting to be any part of the Bible studies as much anymore. Later in 2022, I visit my mom and brother for a month and it's my first time seeing them in nearly 5 years since leaving for Sydney. My stepfather passed away in 2021 prior to my visit, so seeing his grave for the first time was surreal for me. My mom's health is declining as she has kidney disease and is on dialysis, and my brother was still dealing with my stepfather's, his biological father, passing. It was so much for me to take on mentally and emotionally, but I did what I could. I returned to NZ traumatized, but I was expected to carry on as usual. 3 months later, my GF breaks up with me and understandably had lots to say to me. I find out about a week later from my flatmate, who was an intern, that the women's ministry leader said my now ex-GF just wanted marriage. Note, a new couple had just come in to replace the first mission team leaders and are they leading the NZ church today. I noticed for about a year or two before leaving that no one really spoke to me unless if it was ministry favors or if I was running late to church. Are you okay? Was the passive way of asking, where are you? I didn't feel like I had family or friends anymore. Only person that came in was the new leader, but it felt so insincere as leaders tend to get with those who are weak in the church, a church staff member, or someone studying the Bible. I asked to move into my own place for my own space, although by this the new church leader declined me and said you need to learn how to run a household to prepare you for marriage. I lived in over 15 different households up to this point, but okay, I want you married by the end of this year. I stayed quiet and thought, so I have to get married now because he said so. Few weeks later, my flatmate decided that he was going to leave the church for his own reasons. I decided I would leave also. Ultimately, when we left, I took the blame of influencing and poisoning him into leaving. The story that I've heard leaders say about me is, he was growing toxic to his ex-GF's faith and she had to break up with him. Then his toxicity grew worse and affected his flatmate, and he ended up taking his flatmate with him when he left. Since then, all my closest friends stopped talking to me. Other people saw wrongdoings from this situation and turned a blind eye. Only one person who was still in the church constantly stayed in close contact with me, and that was Caleb. And then later the same year, he was no longer part of the ICC, as you guys saw on his post. There is a lot I left out, but I hope this might help someone out there see that they are not alone. Happy 2025.